All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a book that, honestly, changed everything. We're talking about Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, a work that didn't just add to philosophy, it completely rewrote the rules of the game.
Now this deep dive is a special one. It comes to us from the philosophical exploration arm of Energy and Personal Excellence LLC, and it was requested by its founder, Sachin Karnik.
So to really get what Kant was trying to do, you gotta start right here. He saw our minds as being caught in a trap. Our reason, he says, is constantly wrestling with these huge questions about God, freedom, and the universe, questions it just can't ignore. But, and this is the crucial part, it can't answer them either. It's like having an engine designed for interstellar travel that stalls the moment it leaves the driveway. That's the crisis he set out to fix.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the philosophical chaos Kant was dealing with. Then, we'll get into his totally radical solution. We're going to see how our own reason can literally tie itself in knots, figure out the fatal flaw he spotted, and then see how drawing a line around what we can know actually frees us up to believe.
Okay, first up, the battlefield of metaphysics. So what was the big mess Kant walked into? See, metaphysics was supposed to be the queen of all sciences, the one that had all the ultimate answers. But in reality, it was a total wreck.
You have to picture it. For hundreds of years, the smartest people on the planet, the rationalists who trusted only in pure logic, the empiricists who trusted only in what they could see and touch, were locked in this endless philosophical tug-of-war. They were arguing about God, the soul, free will, but they weren't getting anywhere. It was just one grand theory crashing into another, again and again, with no progress in sight.
And that's the big question, right? It's the one that kept Kant up at night. He figured, hey, before we try to answer these huge questions, maybe we should take a step back and examine the tool we're using to answer them. We need to turn reason back on itself and give it a good, hard look.
And that brings us to his solution, which was, well, it was completely out there. He called it his Copernican revolution, and for good reason. Just like Copernicus flipped our view of the solar system, Kant was about to flip our entire understanding of knowledge itself.
You see, for pretty much all of history, the thinking was that our minds are kind of like empty buckets, and the world just pours knowledge into them. Kant just flips that whole idea on its head. He said, no, our minds aren't passive, they're active. They come with a pre-installed operating system, with structures like space, time, and causality. And they use that system to organize all the chaotic data from our senses into what we call reality.
Okay, to follow his logic, we need to understand a couple of key terms. First up, you've got analytic judgments. Think of it this way. The statement, all bachelors are unmarried. The idea of being unmarried is already part of the definition of bachelor. These statements are 100% true, but they don't really tell you anything new.
But then you have the second type, and this is where it gets really juicy. These are synthetic judgments. Here we're adding new information. Take all bodies are heavy. The idea of heavy isn't in the definition of body. It's something extra we learn about the world. These are the statements that actually grow our knowledge.
And that right there, that's the core puzzle Kant had to solve. It became his central question. He looked at things like math and physics and saw they were full of statements that were both synthetic, they taught us new stuff, and a priori, meaning we know they're true without having to go check every single case. I mean, you know 7 plus 5 is 12. You don't need to do an experiment. It's always true. How is that even possible?
This is where Kant's whole investigation takes a really fascinating, almost spooky turn. He discovers that when reason tries to go beyond the limits of what we can possibly experience, when it tries to answer those ultimate questions, it doesn't just fail, it completely short-circuits. He discovered that our own reason, when you push it to the limit, can create these pairs of statements that are perfectly logical, and yet they completely contradict each other. He called them antinomies, and for him, they were the smoking gun. Proof that reason had gone off the map.
And here's one of his big examples. Kant showed that you can build a rock-solid, logical argument to prove that the universe absolutely must have had a beginning. But then, you can turn around and use equally perfect logic to prove the exact opposite, that the universe is eternal and has no beginning. I mean, think about that. Both arguments are flawless, but they can't both be true. Reason has literally broken itself.
Okay, so what's the takeaway from all this? What did these mind-bending contradictions actually prove to Kant? Well, for him, this wasn't just a fun little puzzle. This was the symptom of a deep, systemic disease that had infected philosophy for centuries.
He gave it a name, dogmatic metaphysics. It's basically this incredibly arrogant assumption
that our little human minds can, just by thinking really hard, figure out the ultimate truths about reality in itself, things completely beyond anything we could ever see or touch or experience.
And here's the diagnosis. The contradictions happen because our reason is using its tools, concepts like cause and effect or a beginning in time, in the wrong place. These tools work perfectly for making sense of the world we experience, but when we try to apply them to things outside of all possible experience, like the universe as a whole, they just break. It's like trying to measure the color blue with a tape measure. The tool is fine, but you're using it in a place it was never designed to go.
So at this point, you might be thinking, wow, that's kind of depressing, right? All our biggest questions are basically unanswerable. But here's the twist. For Kant, this failure was actually the key to everything. It was the most positive, liberating discovery imaginable.
And that leads us to maybe the single most famous line Kant ever wrote. Now, when he says he's denying knowledge to make room for faith, he's not talking about some kind of blind leap in the dark. He's talking about a rational, necessary moral faith. He's simply drawing a border and giving reason its proper job.
And here is the beautiful, elegant payoff to his whole argument. By proving that our theoretical reason can't know anything for certain about God or free will or the soul, he puts them forever beyond the reach of science. A physicist can never design an experiment that proves you aren't free or that morality is just a chemical reaction. He built a firewall, a protected space, where these ideas can exist as what he called practical postulates, things we don't know, but things we must assume in order to live a moral life.
All right, so after all that, why should we care? Why does this super dense, 200-year-old philosophy matter to us today? What's the big takeaway?
What Kant did was profound. He didn't weaken science or morality. He gave them their own separate, secure foundations by drawing a clear line in the sand. He taught us that intellectual humility, admitting what you don't know, isn't a sign of failure. It's actually the highest form of reason. It's how we protect what we can know and cherish what we must believe.
And that really leaves us with a question to take away, one that's just as relevant now as it was then. Kant drew a map of the mind's limits for all of philosophy. But in our own lives, in our own arguments and beliefs, how do we know when we've hit that wall? How do we know when we've crossed the line from rational argument into pure speculation?
And that's our look at one of the most important works in the history of thought. Thanks for joining us.